Well, hello. I'm going to do something very special today, or at least to me it's very special. I'm going to visit the Keukenhof. It actually should be closed this year, that's what they said, or that's what we kind of expected at least. But thankfully they're allowed to open these 3 days in this weekend. And yeah, I'm about to visit the park. I just have to do a negative test beforehand, the corona test obviously. And if it's negative, what I expect, then I can go inside. Yeah, I'm really curious. It's a bit weird as well because yeah, normally I work there, and yeah, this is I think the very first time that I'm going to visit the park without guests walking behind me. So yeah, it's going to be a different kind of visit. But in a way, I'm going to take you with me anyway. So in a way, I have my guests with me. So yeah, see you in a bit when I have my negative test. Okay, I tested negative, so that means I can go inside. Yeah, I didn't have a clue, to be honest, where to park my bike, because normally yeah, I will be here with a bus or a cab or whatever, but not with my bike. So I kind of parked my bike here illegally, something I would normally never do, but yeah, well, to me this is the place now. And then I have to line up. I never saw such a long line. I think I saw it often very busy, but never ever such a long line. So I'm going to line up. This is just so cool to see. Look at all the cars parked there, and then a long line, which is actually funny because this is a very long line, but then hardly anyone is waiting here, so I'm going to take this line. But look at this, people waiting to get into Keukenhof. Yes. This is just so strange. It's so nice to be in the park, but it is so different than any other time I have visited the park before. It's very quiet. Well, sometimes in the morning it can be quiet, but then you're happy. Only Dutch talking people in general. Another group to take care of. Nor guests. This is just the same as every other year. This beautiful hill. I just love it. What I always like to show here is that you see tulips, and if you have a good look in between, you see the crocus. Hello. You see the crocus that already died out. Some are still, yeah, kind of blooming, but as soon as they die, you see the tulips coming up, and in that way, every time you can see different tulips or daffodils or crocus blooming here. Well, let's call this in an ugly way a tunnel. But these kind of tunnels, this is what the people had in their gardens of the canal houses, for example in Amsterdam in the 17th century. Because the people back in the days, they were very afraid that when the sun was shining that they would get a bit of a tan. So what they would be doing, they would or just sit inside their house and enjoy their garden that way, or they would walk through the tunnels. So just to make sure they wouldn't get any tan, because the tan was just for the workers and not for the upper class. Beautiful example here in the historical garden in Keukenhof. And what we see there at the end, where you see the daffodils, that is the replica of the garden of Carolus Clusius. And Carolus Clusius was very important. He was the one that brought tulips into the Netherlands. What do you think about when I say the Netherlands? What is typical Dutch? They say, whoa, windmills, or Hansje Brinker, the one that puts his finger in the dike to save the whole country, and obviously tulips. But I have to disappoint you. Windmills, they come from ancient Persia. Hansje Brinker, the story about the guy that put a finger or a thumb or whatsoever in the dike to save the whole country, it's an American story. It's actually a made-up story by an American book writer. And tulips, they don't come from the Netherlands, no, and for sure not from Amsterdam. They are coming from Turkey. Well, when the tulips were blooming in Turkey, the sultans, they loved to make big parties out of it, almost big festivals. And obviously they were inviting guests. And when the guests were going home, they gave a package of tulip bulbs to the guests. And one of those package of tulip bulbs, it arrived at Carolus Clusius, the one that we see up there. He was actually one of the first botanists, and he had his botanical garden in Leiden. Carolus Clusius wasn't willing to sell his tulips, but people loved them, and people were willing to pay a lot of money for them. So what happened when he didn't want to sell them? One night they got stolen. It almost sounds like a good fairy tale, but it's a true story. So they got stolen and they were sold for an awful lot of money. Well, and everyone wanted to have them. So we talk about tulip mania back in the days, as people were willing to pay really weird prices. Prices shot up to 2,200 euros, and if we count it to the amount of money that we have nowadays. 2,200 euros for one single tulip, can you imagine? Well, and what happened? At first, they were giving you a tulip when you were paying the amount of money, but at the end, businessmen were so smart that they started speculation. So you were just buying a piece of paper, and yeah, your bulb was still in the ground. And in the beginning, you would still get the tulip as soon as it came up, but it happened as well very often that the tulip came up or didn't came up, and you paid so much money. So now you can imagine why this replica of the garden of Carolus Clusius is pretty empty, because flowers back in those days, bulb flowers, were so expensive that you couldn't afford to have many of them, and beside of them he just wanted to study them. So if you didn't have too many of them, you could have a good look around them and study them better. If you have a good look at the grass, then you see two different types of grass. You see the light green grass right over there, very nice and fresh, and that's grass that's sown in. I hope I pronounced it well, but sown in with seeds. And then the dark grass, which you see over here, this is turf-laid grass, and that's slightly stronger, because normally Keukenhof expects over 1 million visitors a year, and not everyone is just walking on the walking paths. We have 15 kilometers of walking paths, so it should be enough. But still, obviously, a lot of people are walking on the grass to make the best picture ever, and yeah, that damages the grass. And just to make sure that at least the side strips are slightly stronger, they use different types of grass. In the back of me you see my favorite blossom tree, beautiful one. It's almost in full bloom, just needs a couple of more days I think, and a bit more sun. And if I turn around, you see the windmill in the back of me. And it was a windmill, it come from the end of the 19th century. It was actually standing in Groningen. First a grain mill, later on changed into a polder mill to bring up the water. And later on, when it wasn't in use anymore, it was given as a present by the Holland America line to Keukenhof, and it's standing here now since the 60s of last century. I'm now in the Willem-Alexander Pavilion, which is called after our king. And look at this. It's full with hundreds, thousands of blooming tulips. So many varieties. This is my favorite spot. A must see in Keukenhof. I'm so happy that I'm able to see it, although I'm wearing a face mask. Doesn't matter. Beautiful, isn't it? Look how tall they are. Oop, see a little bit of wheat. Gardeners. Some work to do. Look at this. I think this is one of the best moments actually to see this pavilion. Because it won't take that much longer before they're gone. And they're in full bloom now. Sometimes you're just lucky in a way. Oh, look at this one's. Parrots, I think, when I'm right. Oh, and my favorite ones. Look at these. Oh, pink and white. So much to see. Look at them, they're huge. Normally you see little signs here, so you actually know what kind of variety you're looking at. At this moment they haven't placed them yet here. Where does the name Keukenhof actually come from? Because if you literally translate it, you say kitchen garden, and that doesn't really make sense if you see the park what it is today. But in the 15th century, this beautiful park belonged to the Countess Jacoba of Bavaria, who had her castle just right up there. And yeah, this area was the area that she used to grow her vegetables and her herbs that she used in her kitchen. So everything she basically used in her kitchen, as well as the animals that she shot, she got it from this area. And that's where the name kitchen garden Keukenhof actually comes from. You see these beautiful crocuses that are still blooming. And this is another good example of layered planting technique, as you can see, because the crocus are still blooming, but as soon as they are done, as they're finished, these beautiful little tulips are coming up. And that's called layered planting technique, or, oh, I like that word better, lasagne technique. I have a good example here in my book. Here you can see, and actually you can do it at home as well. I tried it once, forget about it, didn't work for me. But it should be very easy actually to do. And in this way, Keukenhof can bloom for the full 2 months that they are normally open. So there's always something to see, and that's also why it's so interesting to come back more often to Keukenhof. And normally I'm the lucky one that yeah, can come here very often. So you see it changing every time that you get here. So if you have the opportunity to come back several times a year, yeah, you have to just do it. Well, I'm back at the entrance, as you can see. That means that I'm going back home again. I saw that I only walked 4 out of 15 kilometers. I thought I walked quite a bit, but apparently there's so much more to see. I hope you liked it to join me on my visit of Keukenhof 2021. And I hope that next year you can finally visit us again and join me on a walk through Keukenhof. Hope to see you next year. Bye bye.